the way black people see America and the way white people see America have become two completely different things.
What do you say to the children's ministry team that says, I cannot reach the black people in my city because there's not a black person on my children's ministry team?
So I can only imagine that a 12-year-old might be a little more defensive.
Welcome, everybody. I am joined by my friend here to have a conversation about race as it relates to working in children's ministry. I know from my perspective, I wanted to bring my friend Matt Chase on to speak about some of the things that we can do differently on our team, and I pray that this blesses you in some way. A couple disclaimers here. I am a licensed minister with the United Pentecostal Church International. However, this conversation is not endorsed by or is not affiliated by or sponsored by the UPCI or our local congregation. This is just a confirmation. This is just a conversation between two friends about how we can improve. We thought that this might bless you. Matt, if you could go ahead and introduce yourself, we'll get started.
All right. Like he said, my name is Matthew Chase. Originally from Long Island, New York. I just recently moved to Michigan around 2 years ago, and I am the worship leader, one of the worship leaders at our church, Christ Apostolic Church in Albion, Michigan. And yeah, this is just, I'm very blessed. I'm very thankful to be a part of this. When Anthony reached out to me for this opportunity, I was nervous at first, but also very excited. And, you know, I'm very passionate about, I'm passionate about unity. That's really just been like my biggest thing. That's like really the biggest thing that drives me, drives my wife as well, is unity. And, we have conversations like this all the time because we really do feel like there is a lot of unity that is lacking, not just like in the church, but just in the world in general. And, I'm always a fan of having the conversations that most people are not willing to have, so long as they're, respectful, they're, a genuine conversation, and they're about uplifting and not just putting down. And so I believe the conversation we're going to have today is really going to uplift, encourage. Hopefully someone that's watching this will grab some knowledge that they can apply to their church, wherever they are, in whatever situation that they're in.
Thank you. Well, one more disclaimer before we get started. This is not a conversation about necessarily every challenge that our local church faces. We've put together some things to talk about that maybe a different church may be in need of some help with. But also, I want to Matt to know that I do not expect you to speak on behalf of all the black people in America. I want you to speak from your heart, from your experiences. I couldn't speak for everybody from my race. Certainly, I don't expect that of you. With that said, my first question will be, from your perspective, would you define unity? What does that look like, specifically in the instance of children's ministry?
How I would define unity is, that's actually a really good one. I define unity as genuine peace between multiple people. And when I talk about genuine peace, I'm not just saying, oh yeah, we're hanging out together, but I kind of think about you a little differently. Like I think about, like I'm almost like talking down on you behind your back, or I'm kind of thinking, oh, why is this person with me? Why is this person here? No, none of that. It's genuinely like, I am happy that this person is with us right now. I'm happy this person is in our church, in our, like, together with us. And so in the grand scheme of thing, in your sense of like children's ministry, like unity is just like having, I mean, it can really be applied to just church in general. Like you just have that group of people that there are in a perfect world, there's no issues, there's no beefs, there's no problems with anybody. But in the simplest form, when people are together, it's peaceful, it's welcoming, it's warm, and everyone is there for one reason and one reason only, and that is to glorify God. And nobody's issues with anybody else matters. Nobody's holding a grudge against anybody.
Hmm.
Um, no petty problems. Like none of that matters. In the simplest form, if you're together to worship God in one accord, that's unity right there. If you're in there in one accord, that's really what it means to me.
Thank you. So it's no question that we've seen in media, recent events, that some young black people, but mainly black men and women, have been targets of racism and violence. We're not going to get into the details of every case, and we're not taking sides on any case today.
Hmm.
But I wanted to bring light to the fact that people talk a lot about how it affects black adults, which is great, and we need to discuss that. However, I have not seen much discussion or much outcry for how it's affecting black young people. So my first question, or my second question, is this: from your perspective, is racism and violence a problem for, and how is it affecting black young people?
Um, so when you say young people, which age group are you exactly talking about?
Birth to 17.
Okay, birth to 17. Um, I First off, I want to say that I've seen it a few times, like on social media. Most of TikTok and Twitter, like I've seen a lot of young black people, like teenagers, like between maybe 14 and 17, pretty much becoming the next activists against racism. Like they know their stuff. They're very much about bringing light to the situation, bringing light to the racial injustices that we face in this country. And so I acknowledge all of them that are like that, because when at that age, when I was their age, did not I was not in I was more naive to that stuff. Like I could honestly say at one point I really thought racism was done with, because I didn't hear about it much as a kid, and I didn't really see much happening, or at least I wasn't aware of it. And now, fast forward, these kids have all this information on their phones. The internet is completely different from what it used to be. Information is just like you can get whatever you want in like a couple clicks. And so these kids are literally seeing the world in their hands. So they have a lot more information as of what's going on. So they're really they're more aware, of what's going on than people probably realize. Now for the younger kids, like maybe under like 10, like between like 10 and 7, they're probably not aware unless their parents actually have talked to them about that stuff. Um, and I mean, even then, if the kids are asking, that's still a lot to tell children, what's going on, what is racism, what does this whole thing mean. But I think I was around maybe 7 years old when I realized that I looked different from the kids around me. So I think that's kind of around the age where it starts to click. Like, at least for me, that was the age where it clicked. Like, there is something, I look different than the rest of the kids. Why do I look different? But I didn't think anything bad of it, because nothing really happened to me. Um, at least from where I grew up in a very, I guess we could just say, I grew up in a white neighborhood. I was the token black kid in my school from preschool up until, I want to say, junior high school. At least, yeah, as far as I can remember. And even then, I didn't really think there was much going on. I didn't really hear any of those racial terms. I didn't hear anything like that. But nowadays, like I said, kids have all this information. They know what the words are. They know all about that stuff. So I think it affects them more because they see it so much earlier, so much sooner. Um, and so I think it affects them more than we realize. And I think it's important to talk to the kids about that kind of stuff now before they probably hear from the wrong person. It's, I think, just as important. I feel like just as how it's important that we teach our kids Bible quizzing and all the verses in the Sunday school, we should talk to the kids about what's going on in the world too. Not to say that one is more important than the other. It's just, it is important, and I do believe that it should never be hidden. Um, and of course, when you approach it to children, you got to approach it however you feel is most comfortable, and whatever works best for your children. But I do think it does need to be addressed, at least to the extent so they know that people do see people differently for something as simple as the color of their skin. It doesn't make sense, but that's how it is.
So the next thing I'd like to ask is kind of two parts stemming
Mhm.
off of that. What responsibility do you feel that a children's ministry department within a church has to teach about race? And would that be any offense to a black family, um, and how a church would navigate that is predominantly white?
Um, repeat
I,
that first part.
I guess, in other words, what I'm asking is, what do you feel is the church's responsibility to teach about race? As you said, we teach them verses in scripture and good principles and morals and all of this thing, salvation, all these things. You said that we should be teaching about race, at least to some degree. To what
Yeah.
degree should we be teaching? And from your perspective, if you were a parent, um, would you feel better about that, knowing that the church that you're sending your child to is aware and does teach about race?
For me, I'll answer that second part first because that answer came up a little bit easier.
Okay.
Yes, I would, because I don't have kids right now, but I know that when I do have kids, I'm teaching them about what's going on. I have a white wife, so we've had these conversations of, we're gonna have to talk to our kids about what it's like to be black in America. It's something that I don't believe I should avoid just because my kid is young. Because nowadays kids are bullying so young and saying some of the craziest things to each other. There's probably kids out there that are like 5, 6 years old already saying horrific things to little black boys and black girls, and they're like, what? Why are they doing this? And so I wouldn't have a problem with it, so long as it was, you're teaching about, yes, there's some differences, but that doesn't mean that anyone's better or less than.
Mhm.
That my whole thing is, and this is kind of just going off a little bit off, but I don't like when people say I don't see color. I'm not going to teach my kids that you don't see color. You should see color. The problem isn't that you see color. The problem is you judge off color. That's where the problem comes. And so I think that it's important to find some way in connecting scripture and Bible stories to talk about unity and race. And even though we look different, we're not different in God's eyes. Everyone is special, like some way. I don't want to necessarily teach you how to do your job, because you are
Right.
the head of the Sunday school, but I just feel like I feel like if you can approach it in a way like if you would approach any other lesson, like, because I know I've been in kids church before and taught to them, and you can break down almost anything in a way that a kid can understand to a degree.
Mhm.
So I don't think that it's hard to break down what it means to look different but not be different in God's eyes. I think it's just a matter of the person, how they approach the kids that they're around. So I think that it definitely is important to teach it based on the kids that they have and the environment they're in. And if, like, say the church doesn't have someone, if they're not comfortable doing it themselves and they maybe want someone else in the church to teach it, that should be fine too. Like if you feel like you can't say it in the moment, like, because there might be some questions that might be be like, oh, I don't know how to answer that. You can bring somebody else in. I don't think there's anything wrong with, asking someone else for help. Just like how you asked me to kind of speak from my perspective growing up as a black man in America. I don't think there should be a problem with someone else asking, hey, can you help me with this lesson? It's based on this, that, and the third, and I'm not sure if I can teach on this part. Can you help me with that part? So if just like how so plain and simple, it's like any other topic that you would teach a kid. Just break it down for them in the simplest form and just continue to remind them that God did not put anybody in a special category. Everyone is literally equal in God's eyes, no matter what they speak, no matter what they look like, where they're from, what their status is. It does not matter.
Excellent. Did your parents have that talk with you that, like, I don't know how that would go, but like, we're black, but you go to a predominantly white school, did your parents ever have that talk with you? If so, what age was that? And if you could feel okay sharing at least parts of that, that might help.
I'll be honest, I don't know if I did. I honestly do not remember if I did. I don't think they had that talk. I think they just raised me to, I don't know, I don't, let me I'll try to explain. Like, my parents, they wanted me to be comfortable. They didn't want me to worry about certain things. And maybe at that time they thought that if they explained it in a way I would worry or something like that. I'm not 100% sure. Um, Honestly, I probably could have called my mom and just double checked. um, but I mean, like I said, I grew up in Long Island. I grew up in New York, and that's like the melting pot. I mean, I mean, if you are racist in New York, I don't know what is wrong with you, because like one minute like your whole day is just a bunch of cultures. You can get pizza on one side, then you can get some Jamaican for dinner, then you can probably get some halal like later on in the day. Like,
Yeah.
There's like a bunch of different cultures there, and I grew up just around everybody, so I never really felt like there was really any difference. There was really any need to be different. But when I did like see that there were some that kind of looked at me a little funny, judged a little funny, it was like, I mostly looked at them. I was confused. Like, you really looking at me like I'm the problem here? Like, I was so confused. But yeah, I mean, I don't remember if I had it, but I know I'm definitely going to have it with my kids.
Okay, so let's talk about that then. How will you go about like addressing and talking about these things? And at what age would you start talking to them about this?
It depends on them. I can't give a, a definite answer on that. Like, it depends on how they've grown. Like, if by 5 years old they're asking us why do kids look at me funny because I'm darker than them or lighter than them, then I'm gonna have to be like, all right, I guess it's time for the talk, and try to simplify it. But if it's a little bit older, a little bit younger, I mean, it really just depends on that day, depends on that time. But the most important thing I would just let them know, like, is, yeah, when you get out there in the world, there are people that we know that love you no matter no matter the fact that you're black or white. There's going to be a lot of people that love you for that. And there's going to be a lot of people that hate you because of that. But that does not mean anything's wrong with you. You didn't do anything wrong. That's literally not your problem. That's something they grew up and learned. You don't grow up hating people. You grow up not knowing about them and you not understanding, but it's your choice choice on if you're going to accept their culture or hate them. So I would teach them, like, they were taught to hate. You have to teach them love. You have to show them, like, you might not like me because of XYZ, but I still love you because we're not that different. I would just, oh, sorry, I was just going to say, I would just let them know, like, there is nothing wrong with them. The world might make them feel that there might be something wrong with them, but there is nothing wrong with them because God doesn't make failures. God doesn't make problem kids, doesn't make anything wrong, anything bad.
How does that feel as a black man, knowing that you're going to have to at some point have a conversation with your child or your kids about this, even though white parents may not have to have any conversation at all about race? What are your feelings on that?
It's tough. It's tough accepting the fact that I have a lot, not really a lot, but I have a little bit more weight on my culture shoulders than a white person does, because I don't want to say it and sound negative, but like here's kind of how I kind of look at it. Like the being a black person in America for all these years, it came with resilience from the slave trade, civil rights movement, all the way to now. To It's always been about resilience. Being white in America, it's always been about, well, depending on the era. Like early days, yeah, there was some like Italian immigrants, Irish immigrants that did have it kind of rough, but after a while, it became kind of like just, I don't want to say entitlement because not every white person's entitled, but it just wasn't as resilient as a black person's way in America. And so, and I know nowadays people are like, well, it's not that bad. You should guys get over it. It's not that bad. There's, it's really not like the worst thing. At least not for me. My life really hasn't been horrible, but I am aware that if I go to a certain state, I might not come out alive, and I don't even have to do anything. And I mean, and for some people, and that might not be the case for you. That might not be the case for
Right.
my wife. That might not be the case for other people. But for like me, my brother, my other black friends, there are some places we just can't go with the comfort that a white person has. There are certain things that we do that might make us look a little weird. The fact that if I wear my hood in public, or at least my hood in a store, I'm kind of looked at as, security's got their eyes on me. If someone walks in with a rifle, oh no, man, how you doing, neighbor? you know. Um, so it's tough, but at the same time, I'm not mad at it at all because, like I said, black culture, being black in America, it came with resilience, and with that resilience, it just came a deeper love for who I am, because I know that even though I'm not necessarily better than anybody, I still am loved by, the one who created me. God made us to be, scripture made us to be, we're a royal priesthood. Everybody is a royal priesthood, called out in the darkness into his marvelous light. He didn't specifically say which kind of person, but I know that I am. And I'm I don't I'm afraid, like, my brain's kind of like going like a bunch of different areas, but long story short, like, it's tough, but it's not something that I can't handle.
We kind of mentioned, the ages of, a black young person under 10 might not be aware of it unless the parents had the conversation about it. Um, though, what what portion of this weight that you were describing do you think black young people could be carrying even at this young age of 8, 10, 12?
Um, I mean, I think it just depends on the kid.
Hmm.
Like I said, I grew up and I didn't really have that weight on me because I never had that much of an issue, dealing with racist people in my area. But a black kid in Missouri or Mississippi, you know, at 10 years old might already be feeling like they can't do anything right because they seem to be harassed by every single, well, at least not every single, but they just seem to be harassed by white people in their area because they might be living in a more racist neighborhood. So it really just depends on the kid and the area, just on how much weight's on their shoulders. But I think maybe when they're more aware, I think as we grow up, I think we start being more aware of just what it means to be black in America, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So say that there's a children's ministry department in Mississippi, or just
Hmm.
for an example, watching this right now that says, I have a 10-year-old or 12-year-old black young person in my department. What are some things that they could do today or when they're back in service, knowing or realizing that they may be carrying this kind of load that I can't do anything right, I'm different, nobody likes me, I'm harassed? What could that children's ministry department do differently?
Um, well, first and foremost, never give up on that person. No matter how rough it is, how bad it is, you know, never, 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 never give up on that kid, because that young person might just be feeling that way just because of the environment that they're in. And it's not necessary, and it's not that they're like a bad kid or like a troubled child. It's just, you know, wherever they're at right now, like, it just might be affecting them. And so I think maybe even just talking to them, continuing to have a conversation if they haven't already, like really just letting that kid feel, have a trust in you, because you might be that only person that they can really talk to of just about life.
Hmm.
They might just be going through really, really rough times in their house, in their neighborhood, and they don't have anybody to talk to, but they come to church because, that's probably their only safe place. And so continue to just talk to them, be an outlet for them, and, encourage them in whatever it is that they're doing. Pray for them. You know, if you have kids, pray for them like if they were your kid.
Hmm.
Really seek after them, like really make sure that they are loved by you as a minister, as just the leader, as just someone in their church. I know plenty of friends that had more of a family in the church than their own blood family. And I think for some kids, I always believe that, like, the seeds you plant, you never will see how far those plants grow.
Hmm.
So you might not see that change immediately, but 5, 10 years later, they might be preaching a powerful message, and your name might be part of it. Your story, you reaching out to them and you continuing to encourage them and speak to them might be what kept them going. You might help show them that, God really does love them, because he put someone like you in their life to speak to them, to encourage them, even though everything in their outside life is in shambles. And that's just if that's their situation. I don't know, obviously, what their
Right.
situation is, but if you have that person, just continue to speak to them, encourage them, just continue to love those kids, because they really just need, that's really what they need. They need love more than anything. I think they need Jesus, and they need Jesus, they need that, but they really need love more than anything else. If they don't remember a single scripture you teach them for a whole year, but they remember that you always welcome them with a smile, a high five, or a hug, and you're always keeping them entertained, keeping them happy, making them feel comfortable. So I think that's really what's important for any young person, specifically a person of color. There's not that many, even in your church.
Thank you. Now, looking from the perspective again, let's just say, for example, Mississippi, because we've already used that, and we have a 10 or 12-year-old um, young person who is black and who is struggling with some of this weight that you've been talking about. Um, if the staff, children's ministry staff, is predominantly white, does that make it easier, do you think, or harder to gain trust and to make them feel special, welcoming them with a smile? Does that put an even bigger target on their back, do you think? Because now we're going out of our way for this one person.
It's gonna I feel like it's going to be a bit harder because the way society is making it look now, it's almost like there's a bit of a racial war going on. Like it's just white people against blacks, black people against whites. Like that's what it looks like. And if you're not careful, that's what you might believe. Like I'll be honest, it's with some things going on, at least for me. This is just for me. And this is not a general statement.
Right.
With everything that's been going on and the way people just have talked about the situation or lack thereof, it does kind of put a bit of a strain on my views towards some people, because it's like it's natural just because of how everyone else is portrayed on the media. So you can only imagine, and I'm 28 years old and I understand that it's not everybody. So I can only imagine that a 12-year-old might be hearing these things going on, and they're probably, not all of them, but they might be a little more defensive towards the white people in their church or in their area, just because they see on Twitter or TikTok or YouTube all the issues that's going on. And that's not them completely being hateful or trying to be racist. It's just protection, because nowadays it might feel like you have to be a little bit defensive around people. So it might be harder for that staff, just because those thoughts that are coming into young people's minds nowadays. And so you might have to push. Sometimes you might have to push a little more. You might have to accept that this is going to be a harder task to try to get this young person to kind of open up a little bit more, and again, you should never give up on these kids, because it's not them, it's their environment. So you have to just like how they're in an environment that teaches them that you have to keep an eye out for X, Y, and Z and do this, that, and the third. You should give them an environment that says, I can trust these people. If they can't trust anybody else in the world, they can trust this pastor and this Sunday school teacher and this person and that person in this church, because even though whatever's happening outside is scary, when I'm here, I'm safe. That's kind of what I believe you should want to. That's the kind of atmosphere I think you should want to have and open and allow in your Sunday school.
Absolutely. Some people might think of safety as more of physical safety. Yes, we have a safe area. When you allow your children to come into our Sunday school, we have, security team. We have lockdown procedures if needed, and fire escape plans and tornado plans and everything.
Yep.
But it's interesting that you bring up emotional safety, right? And this goes for all kids, really. And I appreciate that you brought up that it's okay to work harder on that young person who is black that God has brought into your Sunday school ministry. It's okay to work harder on them because they're going to need it.
Yeah. I think um, I think people for the longest time, and I think it's kind of just starting to change recently, like people are starting to realize that kids, their mental health is just as important as an adult's.
Yes.
You know, we grew up in a time where the adults didn't believe that kids really didn't have these kind of issues. You know, you're young. What
Yes.
do you got to be sad for? You're young. What do you got to be angry for? There's a
Absolutely.
lot that they got to be angry for. You don't know exactly where they're going home to, and even if you do, that's still a lot of stuff to handle. If adults are breaking down, think about it like this: if adults are breaking down, dealing with the stuff that they're dealing with, and kids are supposed to be much more sensitive, what makes you think they can handle that?
Yes.
Like they need a lot of it. They need a lot of, you know, reassuring that things are not like their fault. You know, if whatever the situation they're going through, whether it's maybe their parents are getting divorced and they probably feel like it's their fault, or they're just living in an area that just seems to just be really just broken down and they just can't seem to get out of it. Like this, they're holding that weight on their shoulders, and they should be able to know that they're gonna make it through this. They're okay. They're not problems. You know, they might be a little bit bad at times. You know, might be a little hard headed, but they're really not bad. You know, and their emotional state should really be taken just as seriously as an adult's, more so now than ever because of everything that they're taking in now.
Yes. Yeah. Things like divorce and homelessness and hunger, they truly don't see color, right? In the terms of that, they can affect all colors.
Yes.
Um, let's take that road for a minute and let me ask, what could be some of the reasons that we could lose black young people, and not lose in terms of death, but lose out of our church? What are some things that you feel like happen more to black families than white families that could contribute to them leaving the church, like evictions maybe, or along that line?
Um, man, that's a good one. I mean, the first thing I just thought of is like maybe there was just family members that didn't like that their kids was going to that church. You
Mm.
know, maybe they just one minute decided, you know what, I don't want my kid going to that church. Why? I don't know. Maybe because whatever reason that they have, that might be a reason.
Now, could
Maybe
that be because it's a white church?
no. That I was literally gonna say probably because they feel like because their kids are not around that many black kids that they almost don't feel comfortable with that. You know, not and that's not every parent, obviously. Um, but some parents, yeah, they're very protective in that area. They want the kid to feel, you know, comfortable, and they might not feel like their kid's comfortable, and their kid might not feel comfortable in that moment, and they might feel like they need to take their kid out of it. You know, unfortunately, um, that the kid might decide that they just don't want to be there anymore. Um, I mean, those are really the two main issues that I think automatically why they would probably leave the church, just because you know they just don't feel comfortable in the areas that they're in.
Now, because you have the perspective of being the only black young person in your school for so many years, could you speak to how it feels to be the only black child in a room, or one of just a couple black children in a room, and what kind of things are going on in your head at that time, whether there's problems or not, whether there's racism happening or anything like that? Just what does that feel like?
It feels alienating. Off like the first word I could think of is just like you are by yourself. Like I mean I've been in rooms where with my friends, people that white people, Hispanics, and still kind of felt a little bit weird because I was the only black person. I I'm kind of like learning this more about myself. Like I'm all about trying to make jokes on things. I always think that like there's always you can always find humor in everything. And sometimes I think my joking came from me feeling uncomfortable. Just coming in, just walking into I can make an example of when I was at IBC, because I went to IBC for about 4 years, and every now and then we, as groups, would go and visit other churches for the weekend. And there were a lot of times where I was the only black one in the entire building, and I could have just left because felt weird. Sometimes it felt very, very weird, and it's not against anyone in the room. It's just when you, as someone of color, when you see someone that is similar to you, a little bit of weight is lifted because you don't feel by yourself. And I know that's hard for white people to understand, but it really is a serious thing. It is a genuine feeling. It's nothing against white people. It's nothing against anyone else. It's just there is a certain level of comfort that we have when we can walk into a room and there's a few more black people in the room. It just makes us feel like, oh, worst case scenario, I can hang out with them. like, but see, they're going to joke me, and I probably shouldn't, but that's really just how it is, at least in my head. But in reality, like it does make things a little bit easier when you have people around you that are of like mind, like and like skin in to a degree.
I want to go back to asking, what if you don't have a black person on your team? But if it's okay, I'd like you to dissect that feeling a little bit more when you said like it feels like you're by yourself. And you
Hmm.
said that has even happened to you as a grown man. And I don't say that to put you down, I'm just saying for
No, it's
context.
fine.
Now, do you think that's intensified to a child or
Oh,
not?
absolutely. I feel like every feeling that we have, not everything, but for the most part, it's amplified as kids because kids don't have a complete understanding of why they're feeling the way that they are, of what's going on in the world. They just feel something and it's just like, oh my goodness, what's going on? That's like why, I mean, that's why you can bump a kid and he's bawling his eyes out, but he hasn't even cut himself. Like it's things are just amplified for kids. So I can only imagine like when they're aware, and this is when they're aware of it. If they're not aware, then there's probably not no problem. But if they're aware, then that they might be the only black kid in their class or the black kid in the room. It's like, yeah, it might feel a little weird, because excuse me, because it might, at least in my head, there would always feel like there's that one kid that's just going to be the bully, or just one kid that might just make fun of you because you look different or whatever the case may be. So yeah, I think it's a little bit, or maybe a lot worse for a kid in that situation.
So say that a church out there is listening and they can think of, their children's ministry and they see that they can reflect on the fact that they have one or maybe a few black young children and they're coming to the realization that you just shared how different they feel. Let's tackle what they can do differently as as white people, as white Sunday school teachers, specifically to address the feeling that that child is by themselves, is alienated. What are some practical things from your perspective that can take away those feelings, or at least minimize them?
Hmm. My first thought was, to talk to the kids about it, but not every kid might feel comfortable talking about what's going on, about that feeling. And you obviously don't want to address it in front of everyone, like make a scene out of it, because that kid might feel even worse now, because now everyone's like, hey, he's different. But like, I guess there's got to be a way of communication where, even if it's not necessarily with them, maybe even with the parents, in a sense, or like maybe be aware, like if you see that the kids are acting a little different, or they might kind of come off a little bit like maybe standoffish, after a while, maybe talk to maybe address it with the parents, in a sense, like, I think your kid might feel a little bit uncomfortable maybe being in this area, and maybe ask them, do they feel comfortable being in this church? Is there anything that maybe the parent would want them to do? Because I don't want to speak for the parents of these kids, because every kid moves
Right.
different and behaves different. But I feel like it can't be swept under the rug at all.
So what I'm hearing you say is that if you are predominantly white team and
Hmm.
you have one or just a few young black children in your ministry, and you're sensing that there's some pushback or defensiveness, or you just can't connect to them, that from your perspective, if you were a parent of one of those children, you would appreciate the team going to you and saying, "Hey, is there anything we can do to make your child feel better in Sunday school?"
Absolutely. I think I feel like that needs to happen more. Like, I think, I don't know, and I mean, I don't know how it is with everybody's church, but I feel like when something like that is happening, it needs to be brought up. You can't just say, "Oh, maybe they'll just get over it," or it might just kind of play out, and they might just be having a bad day. Like, I don't think people really understand just how someone's actions really pretty much um change. Like, I don't think people understand how a kid's actions will determine where they're going to be going in the future. Like, what's going to happen, like how they're acting now is going to be where they're headed to next year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years
Yes.
from now. And instead of just playing it out and just kind of, again, this kind of goes back to us saying, how a kid's emotional and mental health is important and should be, dealt with and handled properly. We shouldn't just kind of look at how these kids are acting and just kind of be like, kind of brush it off. It should be addressed properly, respectively and respectively. I think I probably just said it wrong the second time. But they should come to the parents with respect and with authenticity. Like, hey, I don't want your kid feeling out of place. I don't want them to feel out of place. Is there anything that we can do that you think we could do to help, so that they feel a little bit more comfortable? And maybe the parents might be a little weird about that. They might appreciate it, but I think every parent will, at the end of the day, might appreciate that the Sunday school teacher went out of their way to try to make their kid feel special, instead of just kind of letting their kid just do whatever they want to do, and then it becomes something that they weren't expecting.
What I'm hearing you say is that it does not make, from your perspective,
Hmm.
it does not make the race issue worse to talk to parents of a black child about race in the term of assisting that child and helping that child.
Right, absolutely. It does not make it worse. It
Thank you.
should not. This kind of just goes into another thing. Like, it always annoys me when people say that talking about race only divides us. No, it doesn't divide us. Avoiding the issue divides us. Letting things happen, like, what's been happening recently, that's causing the division. Not taking holding ourselves accountable as people and actually addressing the issue. That's what's causing the division. not everyone getting so upset because we're calling out the problem. It should not be, we shouldn't keep quiet over these things just because they're sensitive. Because to me, if we have enough boldness to talk about every other issue that's going on in the world, if we have enough boldness to talk about um, uh, the LGBTQ community, if we have a whole boldness to talk about abortion, if we have boldness to talk about um, lust and fornication, why can't we talk about racism out loud?
Mm-hmm.
Why is that the turning point for us? Why do we stop and say, "Oh, no, 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 that's a no-no"? That should be the first thing, especially now with everything that's going on. It needs to be addressed because that is where I believe the unity will come, when we can address it and fix it. Because think of it like this: an addict doesn't get better until they admit that they have an issue.
Correct.
You don't just fix an addict by not talking about the issue. The addict themselves have to first say, "I need help." And then they start going into the next steps of growth. So as a people, as a country, we need to be able to say out loud, we have a problem here. Let's address what the problem is and then take the steps going forward. And addressing it in a proper, respectful way, I believe, is the first step in that, really.
What would you say to someone who has the opinion that as a white person, it's not my responsibility to teach my children it's about race? The father of the black children should be the one to talk to their kids about their race.
They are 100% wrong. And that right there is the problem. That right there, when you when you take the responsibility off of your shoulders and put it on someone else's. Everyone that lives in this country has the responsibility of talking about this. Every single person, every white family, black family, Hispanic family, Asian family, everybody. Just because it doesn't happen to you does not mean it doesn't happen. And I think that's the issue for a lot of people, is because they don't see a lynching, because they don't see people driving in the KKK hood, or they don't see anything crazy happening on their block. It's really not that much of a problem. But racism is much more than just the swastikas and the KKK and all the craziness. The racism is, that black kid being bullied by the kids in the Sunday school because he's black. It's the church members who refuse to sit with the black members of their church. It's the people who talk about the people who came from the hood and drove in because they felt like, God was calling them into the church, but because they were getting such evil eyes from the people in the church, they were like, you know what, I don't know if I should be here.
Mm.
That's the problem. And everyone needs to understand that they are responsible for addressing it to their kids, to their family members, to their friends. Everyone has that responsibility. I should not be the only one talking about, racism, and I shouldn't be the only one telling my future kids, that there are racists out there. That should be, your responsibility. That should be my mother-in-law's responsibility to talk about her family, and Trump's responsibility. It should be everybody's responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just on the people of color. It's on the white person as well.
Well, what would you say then to the white parent that says, I don't need to talk to my child about race. He has a black friend and they get along fine. Why do I need to have a discussion about race when obviously he or she is doing fine?
Having a black friend does not give you the "I'm not a racist" pass. Having a black neighbor, knowing a black person, does not automatically give you a "I'm not a racist" pass. That excuse has completely died for a while now. Nobody believes that. No black person, when they hear that, they're actually saying, "Oh, you know what? You're actually okay." No, they don't think that. It doesn't work that way. And also, I would even ask them, do you see the conversations that your son or daughter are having with their white friends? because they might be talking really crazy about that black person. They might be making those racist jokes that they think are funny but are actually very offensive. They might be trying to, you know, I don't know, like they might be bullying this person more than you realize, but because they say, oh, they're my friend, they get a pass? No, that doesn't mean anything. Actions speak louder than words. I can say you're my friend, but if I don't treat you like my friend, you're not my friend.
Mhm.
So that parent's kids can say that they have a black friend, but if that kid is not treating their black friend equal with respect, if they're not learning, like if they're not actively like showing love to them, but they're just kind of manipulating them or bullying them or just whatever the case may be, doing everything that a friend doesn't do, that's not his friend.
Right.
That's not a friend at all. So when a parent says that, it doesn't mean anything to me.
Thank you for that response. That was excellent. What are some things that a white parent can talk about specifically with their white children concerning race? If this was going out to every white parent in America and you had your chance to say, talk to your kids about A, B, and C, what would it be?
Man, they've probably heard from Twitter or Facebook of the term white privilege. That's not
Yes.
a that's not a made up word. That's not a cop out for anything. That's a real thing. And it's not to the and it's not and it's the simplest way I can describe it is you have a little bit more leniency as a white American than I do on
Yes.
certain things. We might end up doing, say we do the same crime, like may say we, I don't know, I don't even make a description of a crime, but say we do the
Right.
same crime, there is a good chance you're going to do less time than me, even though everything was the exact same. They talk about how it's if a black person and a white person were to apply the same job, have the same credentials and everything, that there's a higher percentage of the white person getting higher than the black person. That's kind of like a white privilege thing.
Mhm.
White privilege doesn't necessarily mean that you are immune to bad things happening. It just means that when things happen to you, you get a little bit more leniency than me. And
Yeah.
those kids, they're going to have a little bit of more of a privilege. Because how many times can you recall of a white kid that did something, and the first thought in your head was, if a black kid did that, he would not have gotten that kind of punishment.
Lots.
It would have been a lot worse. And that right there is white privilege right there,
Yes.
automatically. Simple. And it doesn't mean, and that doesn't mean that you think that you're better than me or anything like that. You might not
Correct.
even realize that you have it, but that's just how society and just America as a whole, it was, I don't want to say created, but in a way created. I mean, for goodness sakes, we go back all the way to the slave trade. Everybody wanted to make all the product and do all that stuff, but they didn't want to do the work. So what do? They got made,
Mhm.
and like that's their privilege of being able to do that. I couldn't do that back then.
Right.
Like my people couldn't do that, and they're couldn't. Okay, so this is something else I was just realizing. Like when, because someone will say, if I say I'm proud of being black, someone might say, oh well, that's racist. Da 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 da. No, no, no. There is a difference between black pride and white pride. Black pride comes from resilience, and it doesn't mean that I'm better than you. It just means that my history has tried to harm me, but I'm thankful from where we've grown from. Some white pride comes from ego, superiority. Why and basically it's like, think of the Aryan Brotherhood. That entire culture was just like, if you don't look like this, that, and the third, you're impure. Automatically, you're done. And even some white supremacists, that's like, if you are not looking like this, that, and the third, you are not superior, you're not better, you're lower than us. Black pride doesn't say that I'm low, that you're lower than me. It just says that I look at myself with more value. I hold myself with more value than you hold me with more value, with value. And I want parents to teach their kids that you can. I mean, also you can. I can kind of retract some of that white pride thing, because it's not every bit of white pride. You can be proud of who you are.
Hmm.
Just don't use that as like a stepping stone over me.
Yes.
That's where the difference is. Like, we can be proud of who we are, but once we start stepping over other cultures because of who we are, then you start leaning towards, the racism and the hatred and that kind of stuff. And so you should teach your kids, like, you might look different, but you really are not that much more different than I am.
Hmm.
But regardless of financial status, whatever the case may be, God did not make any group of person better than another. It doesn't matter what anybody says, any book says. Tell me in the Bible where it says that.
Hmm.
You can't, because
Yeah.
that's not how it was. That's not how it was made. Yes, He made us to be in different cultures and different areas, but in God's eyes, we are all one and the same. And so, I mean, it's. I know I probably might have gone through like a whole bunch of other things, but I just want white parents to not of I don't want white parents to avoid talking about that stuff. I don't want white parents to think that they're in the clear of talking about that stuff. I don't want white parents to think that they're not racist because of X, Y, and Z. If you talk about a group of people with a little bit of negativity, like if you talk about those Middle Easterns or those blacks in any way, shape, or form, that's not like genuine, like just like genuine uplifting, there might be there's some racially insensitive tones there, and your kids can do that too. And those
Yeah.
kind of like racist jokes, the jokes that you think are kind of funny but are a little bit offensive, you you got to understand that not everything is that funny to everybody else. Certain black jokes, certain those kind of jokes, it don't work for everybody.
Right.
So
A,
yeah,
a good point you brought up is let me take 2 points you brought up. First point was that racism doesn't necessarily have to look like I'm physically or verbally treating you different.
hmm
I can feel things differently about you, and that is a form of racism. At the very least, it contributes to the race problem. Correct?
yes, it's not just strictly it's not, you don't have to straight up say I hate it, so insert
Okay.
culture here. But if you see those people and you feel almost like, if you feel a type of way that's not good, that is something that really isn't a godly feeling, it might not necessarily be complete racist, but it might be racially insensitive,
Hmm.
because there is a bit of a difference. Like, not everybody is completely racist. We all had moments where we had like a racially insensitive moment. I know I have too.
Yes.
That's something, like, that's a thing. So you don't have to necessarily say it out loud, but if you feel it in your heart, I mean, that's kind of that's you ain't got to really say it if it's in your heart, right?
Right. Right. So as a white parent, if I feel that my child is not a racist or does not have a problem with race because of XYZ, I can name whatever I want to name to make me feel better about that.
hmm
At the end of the day, you may not be racist. You may not, your child may not be racist, but you're saying it is still very important that the white parent has a conversation with the white child that race problems do exist.
Yes, Yes,
Even if
because
you think your child is exempt from all the racist feelings that are in the world and they're a
yes,
perfect little Johnny Appleseed, you should still
yes,
have that conversation.
yes, because even though it's they shouldn't they're either going to learn one of two things. They're either going to learn about unity and how everybody is equal, or they're going to learn that one side, that their culture is better than the other. They're going to either learn one or the two things. And it's important to teach the love and the unity, especially as a Christian. Like, you cannot be a Christian, and if I get in trouble for this, I'll take it. But you, at least, and this is all for me. Anthony doesn't. This is not. I'm not. This is all me. You cannot call yourself a genuine Christian and feel a type of way about another culture that is degrading, disrespectful, rude, anything like that. You cannot, because because Scripture even says, love your enemies, love everyone, even your enemies. So even if you don't like even if you don't like the person as a whole, you can't turn around and you can't say that you are a child of God. You love everybody, but you feel a type of way when a person of a different color or a different culture is in the room, or you hear about them or you read about them. You can't do that. It doesn't work.
Does
Like,
not
if you
compute.
don't have love in your heart, like I'm pretty sure even it says in Scripture, like, if you don't have like love in your heart, God's not there. God can't really, you can't. God's not showing you love either, in that sense. And I'm butchering the Scripture, so I apologize for that. But basically, if you're not showing the love that God is showing, are you like, are you really as much of a Christian as you say you are?
Hmm.
There shouldn't be any exceptions. It doesn't matter what the history, what the person did, with this, that, and the third. Doesn't matter what Trump says. Doesn't matter what nobody says. As you, as a child of God, as someone who, if saved, filled with the Holy Ghost, and all that, you cannot talk about being in one accord in your church, but you can't be in one accord with the people from the hood.
Hmm.
You can't be in
Powerful.
one accord with the people in your little cul-de-sac, but you can't. Okay, here's another way of saying it. You can't be called to missions if you can't even unite the people in your area.
Hmm.
How are you going to teach the love of God to another culture, but you can't even reach the people in your area that's probably the same culture, just down your block?
Okay, so let's stop there and take you further then. Going back to how it relates to children's ministry. You say, you want to be called to the mission field, yet you can't work in your own area. What do you say to the children's ministry team that says, I cannot reach the black people in my city because there's not a black person on my children's ministry team?
Like I said, I don't think it's completely all the way like necessary to have one. I do believe that you can connect with a person of a different culture, of a different color than you. You just have to, well, really, you just got to ask God to give you the wisdom and the patience for that kind of stuff. Because if you really are feeling like you can't do that because of XYZ, there's probably a level that you just haven't reached yet. Because I do think
Wow.
that you can connect with everybody to a certain degree. You might not necessarily be able to know exactly how a black person thinks. Like, my wife, I'll just give my wife for example. She's white, full on white. She does not know how it feels to be a black person,
Yes.
but she still has that love, that understanding, that compassion to learn about our culture, to learn what it's like to live, in this case, live with a black person, to have a black person's last name, to have my last name, to be married to me, and to see what it's like for me going and that came from our conversations, and that also came from her just always having a love of learning about other cultures. She had that desire. Some people, they just don't, they they haven't tapped into that yet. I think if you really want to learn how to reach people, I think you can. I really do genuinely believe you can. Now, having a black person on your team, would that help? Absolutely. I think it does. Representation does matter. Kind of go back to what I said in the beginning. I think it is important to have someone in leadership that looks like them because it gives them an idea of who they can become. But if for whatever reason you don't have that right now, that does not mean you can't have any black kids in your Sunday school or in your youth team or in your church. You can still have them. You just have to approach it a little bit different because now you have to learn their culture. I mean, you still kind of have to learn if you had somebody on the team, but now without that person, you really have to sit down and learn, excuse me, um, how they see things. And you have to also accept the fact that they don't see things the same way you do. You can't convince them that the world you might not be able to convince them that the world is how you see it because a black person the way black people see America and the way white people see America have become two completely different things. And it's very hard to convince someone who's grown up in that culture where it's always been kind of where we've always been not yeah we've always been to some degree degraded, humiliated, and had a target on our back. It's hard for them to look at an America differently if that's what they've grown up on. But you can hear what they're saying and realize that hey, this is another side to it.
Mhm.
So I think it's possible. You just have to really, really work hard for it.
Yeah. So to that church that says we don't have any black kids because we don't have a black Sunday school teacher, and so we can't. You say you're not trying hard enough. It is
Yeah,
possible.
yeah. I think I take when it comes to church and fulfilling what God calls us to do, I take it very literally when we sing nothing is impossible. I take that literally. Like I am one of those people that says, yeah, if God said if we can be in one accord, united with different cultures and different people, it's possible.
Mhm.
There is no stopping that. I mean, you might be stopping that, but but that might be it. But like when if you really want if you really want that, it's possible. When you're trying to fulfill what God calls you to do and you want to bring those people in, it's possible. Is it hard? Yes. But that doesn't mean that it's impossible. It's just something that you just really have to pray and fast and really see God for to help you in those times of transition and reaching new souls, reaching new people.
So you're saying if I um, am a predominantly white church or have a predominantly white Sunday school team, I have a predominantly white uh, base of kids, and I want to reach black children and black families. I need to pray for wisdom and how to
Hmm.
reach them. I need to
Yes.
do some fasting.
Yes.
I need to put my boots to the ground in
Hmm.
the community, working for
Hmm.
unity, working to learn their culture,
Yes.
understanding that there might be some defensiveness and that's okay.
Yes.
It just means that we have to continue working toward earning their trust. Um, wow,
Because
that's
it
fantastic.
like like the way you worded it, it really is no different than you reaching out for anybody else in church.
Yes.
There's really nothing different. Only thing different is the people are a little darker. That's it. You're learning about you're taking the time to learn the community, you're gaining their trust, you're preaching them and reaching them and talking to them about God and about unity and just God's love. you would do that with anybody else in church. So why is it a little different because you got to go to a little rougher area in your neighborhood, or it's just someone that's just of a different culture? It's really the simplest thing, at least to me. When the way you worded it, it really is like as simple as anybody else that you're trying to reach. It's just another soul. That's why racism and all that stuff, it doesn't make sense to me in the church, because it's like everyone's a soul, and we're trying to bring souls into the kingdom. We're not trying to bring a specific kind of soul. We're just trying to bring souls, period.
Yes.
We're complicating it more because we're looking at people based on who they are, based on their name, based on their race, based on their financial status, like whatever the case we're looking at. And people won't admit it, but that's what they're looking at. And it's not that complicated. I mean, it's hard in the grand scheme of things, like doing the work.
Yeah.
But I always say, like, living for God is hard and easy at the same time. Like, it's hard to actually do it, but once you start doing it, it's like, oh, it's really not that hard.
Would you think that it would be a good idea for churches out there, kids pastors, Sunday school teachers, to have a similar conversation with somebody that they know that's Black that would be willing? Do you think that you are in the minority of Black people that would appreciate a conversation? Or do you think there's a majority of Black people that would appreciate the Sunday school teacher or pastor going to them and asking for their thoughts and input?
I think a majority. Like I said, it really just takes a conversation. And I think when it comes to race, that's a conversation that people just are too scared to have, because it's just a touchy topic. It's a very touchy topic. You don't want to say the wrong thing, you don't want to do the wrong thing. But if you really want it to work, it's just a conversation to have. And I think a lot of and again, I'm not speaking for everybody, but I just feel like I feel like Black people would appreciate if white people would have that conversation out loud. Like, if they really would just say, yeah, there is a problem, how can we fix it? Like, you taking that extra step and saying, what can I do? Even though we've never had any issues, you've never shown any prejudice or hatred or anything like that, and I know that's not you at all. You still took that time and said, how can I approach this to make the atmosphere that I am in more welcoming for those of a different culture around me? I think a lot of Black people would appreciate if more people did what you did.
Thank you.
Just out loud saying, what can I do to help? Because I've seen it online a lot. I've seen a few people straight up say that when they tried to have these conversations, they were shut down. They tried to talk about this stuff and deal with it, and it was like people would say, no, you can't talk about that, or you shouldn't talk about that. And it's like, this is why the problem is the way it is, because people are too scared to talk about it. Don't be scared. Just speak in wisdom, like in any other topic.
What would you say to the person that says, I want to talk to the Black person in my church about how she or he feels about what I can do, but I'm worried that I might phrase something the wrong way when I'm talking to them, or I might ask something that offends them? What would you say to that?
I mean, I would just treat it like any other conversation. You got to build trust with them, like any other kind of friendship. You just build trust. Like, you don't just, when you're reaching out for new people in your church, you're not just slapping the Bible in their face and saying, have you been baptized yet? No, you're trying to build a relationship with them first. Yes. Well, at least I hope you are. Like, it's all about relationship. And so if you have somebody if anybody's watching this and they can automatically think of someone that they want to talk to about this stuff, do you have that kind of relationship where you can have that conversation? Because it might be, you don't, obviously you don't want to offend, you don't want to say the wrong thing,
Right.
but I think if you come in with genuine curiosity and humility and curiosity, like really trying to learn, not just to say, oh, I know this, but because you want to expand the kingdom, you want to help make more people feel welcome. I think I think the conversation will be a little bit easier. I think it won't be as bad as people make it out to be in their head once they start having it. I think that's what actually what the point that you made. I think that's what scares people so much is because they don't want to say the wrong thing, and instead of trying to like build it a relation of the trust with other people and trying to find the right words, they just don't say anything at all because it's easier to just not say anything than try to approach it. But I think if you have that trust, and I mean, first off, you pray, asking God for the right words to approach the conversation, and just um the humility, because you might hear something that you might not like at first. That might be something to deal. That might be something to accept. Like you might hear something that might kind of like feel a little like, oh, why do you have to say that? Why does she have to say that? But again, sometimes the best conversations are the hardest ones to have.
Yes, definitely agree. Even in this conversation, there's been a couple of things that I've taken. It's like, wow, I could have handled that differently for that particular child in my ministry.
Hmm.
And I think being able to put yourself as a white person, take yourself back.
Hmm.
This is not about a black person telling a white person all the things that they do wrong.
Right.
It's not a white person asking a black person to fix it all. It's
Hmm.
just taking a step back and evaluating how you can help the situation.
Yeah.
Um, Matt, this has been an excellent conversation. I want to ask one more question,
Okay.
two ways,
Okay.
before we wrap up. What would you say to a children's pastor or a kids ministry team that they think they're doing good, they're on the right track? What would
Hmm.
you say to them? And then on the other side, if a children's minister out there or kids ministry team, after our things back and forth, things we talked about, they say, "Wow, we have a long way to go." What would you say to each of those groups?
Um. Actually, repeat the first part because
Yeah, sorry. So, what would you say to a team that thinks they're on the right track after hearing the things that we've discussed? They say most of that I'm aligned with. What would you say to them? And then what would you say to the team that says, "Wow, this conversation has really opened my eyes. We're really missing the mark." What would you say to them?
two words that would work for both: keep going.
Keep going.
Keep going. For the ones that feel like they're doing a good job, keep going, because the moment you start getting comfortable, the moment you start thinking you've done everything, is the moment you start slipping. And I think that's just kind of like a life thing I've always learned,
Yeah.
that I've kind of approached, is like the moment you start thinking you know it all and you've done everything that you could, that's the moment things start going a little bit downhill. And
Wow.
you don't want to get so caught up in, the comfort that you're actually doing a good job, that you start slipping up on things because you think, oh, you've done so good that it can't go wrong. It can go wrong. Things can start to disintegrate before you realize it. So keep keep fighting the good fight. Keep talking to the kids, keep teaching them, keep reaching out to them, continue to uh, keep them feeling loved and welcome, because they will remember that. Like I said before, if they don't remember a single scripture, they'll remember the Sunday school teacher that showed them that love, that compassion, that welcomed them in open arms. And for the team that feels like it's not getting better, it's not over yet. It's every every church, every minister, every person is going through everybody's got a testimony. Every church, every ministry has a testimony, and testimonies never start and end completely good. It's got to go downhill some point. You know, it's got to get bad at some point, and you might just be at that place where it's just at a bad place, bad point. But that doesn't mean that you're necessarily doing anything wrong. You just might be in the middle of the trial, and you're just kind of at that place where it's like, okay, what what else can we do? You know, there might be something else that needs to be done that you just didn't realize you had to do. There might just be some more conversations that you just need to have. There just might be some, you know, some humble moments, whatever the case may be, but it's not over. You know, as long as the doors are still open, as long as the church is still open, as long as God is continuing to call these people, call you into the ministry that you're in, you still have a chance to reach somebody, some young person. You have that chance. It might not feel like it might not look like it, but you have a chance. So keep going. It's not, you might not realize it now, but your work is not going to go in vain. I don't believe that. I don't believe that a youth minister's work goes in vain. It's I don't think it's wasted. The only it might feel like that maybe because the young person maybe might not be in the church now, or they might, whatever the case may be, but that was their choice. That was not your fault. That was not something that you did. That was their decision. But if you're doing everything that you're doing everything that you can. You're praying, you're fasting, you're communicating, you're doing everything, and it's still a little rocky. It's not over yet. Continue, keep going, because I guarantee you're going to reach somebody. If not, you've already reached somebody. They just haven't really realized what's happening yet.
Wow. I feel so encouraged speaking to you tonight. Thank you, Matt, so much for your time, for
Thank you.
your candidness, openness, and willingness to have this discussion with me. I know we're friends and we go back and forth and we have a good time, but that doesn't take away from the fact that this conversation has been, some people say life changing. I'll say ministry changing. I
Thank you.
want to be the best minister I can and minister to the people that God has blessed me with the capability or the ability to. And that means that sometimes I need to read the pages and pages of notes I took on you tonight and understand that just because God has called me to children's ministry doesn't mean that I'm automatically the perfect children's minister for the congregation I serve.
Right.
You know, they say God doesn't call the qualified; He qualifies
Qualified,
the called.
called. Yep.
Yeah, and this is some of that. I feel like through these conversations, children's ministry leaders can become more qualified. Not
Hmm.
again, not that you're speaking on behalf of all Black people, but uh, they can say, "I've had one, two, three, five, 10 conversations with trusted members of the Black community, and so I have at least some leg to stand on and say these changes need to be implemented in
Yep.
our ministry so we can move forward." Matt, do you have any wrapping up thoughts?
Well, first off, thank you again for even having me. Thank you for even um, letting me be a part of this. You know, like I said before, conversations like this need to happen. I appreciate you even having that desire to have the conversation, because it is the first step in changing, at least in our community, but also anyone that's going to watch this. Having the conversation will change so much. You might not realize it right now, but just having the conversation will change so much. And I know it's hard to address this kind of stuff now, but you know, like I said before, God did not make us one better than the other. God did not make us to live as if we're in a podium while someone else is in a pit. Like, we're all equal in God's eyes. We were all made in his image, and it's important that we really showcase that love towards everybody in whatever situation that there is. And if anybody for anybody that's watching this, for any if there's nothing else that you grab, I just want you to really understand that, when they say God is love, that's everybody.
Yes.
It's everybody, and you you are responsible. You have to showcase that, not just the pastor, not just the worship leader, not just X, Y, and Z. You watching this, you have that requirement, I guess. We'll say that, to showcase that love towards everybody in your area, and hope. And I just pray that you would be able to. I just lost my train of thought. That you would just be able to apply something from this conversation into your church, into your ministry, and I believe that we can all make a change. It's just a matter of, are we willing to do what we need to do to make that change?
Wow. Powerful words, sir. Let's go to the Lord in prayer over our local congregation and all churches that may be watching this. Lord,
Yes.
thank you so much for everything that you have allowed to come forth tonight. Things that weren't even in the agenda to be talked about, and we've gone over and gone over. But Lord, we submitted this conversation to you so that you would have your way. I pray for everyone who would watch this, no matter their position in their church, Lord, that they would take the time to look at this from a perspective of understanding, to see what they could do, even if it's just one little thing differently, to help this race issue that is still existing so much in our city, in our churches, in our world today. Lord, help us to have the wisdom to have these types of conversations, Lord, but also the strength to stand up, not only as a white person standing up and making changes, God, but help that black young person, that black child stand up and continue to keep going and help those that feel like they're just by themselves and that they feel this alienation. I pray for every Sunday school teacher and minister, children's pastor out there, Lord, that they would have the the desire to make a change in their local body. Help us today and help us move forward. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.